60-year-old mountain black widow gave shelter to a starving cowboy. He stayed and married her. The Colorado Rockies stretched endlessly in all directions, their snow-capped peaks piercing the gray winter sky. Eulalia Green stood in her doorway, watching dark clouds gather above her isolated cabin. At 60 years old, she had grown accustomed to the mountain's moods. The wind carried the promise of a fierce storm. Leah had lived alone for 3 years now, ever since her husband passed. Their cabin sat nestled among towering pines, surrounded by carefully tended herb gardens that lay dormant beneath the snow. She preferred the solitude. The mountains asked nothing of her except respect, and she gave it freely. The blizzard struck with violent force that evening. Snow whipped against the windows while wind howled through the trees. Leah sat by her fireplace, mending clothes by lamplight. The storm would last days. A heavy thud against her door made her freeze. Then another. Someone was out there. She opened the door to find a man collapsed on her porch. Snow covered his thin frame like a burial shroud. His lips had turned blue, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. Frost clung to his beard and eyebrows. Leah dragged him inside without hesitation. She had seen men die from exposure before. This one was close. She worked through the night, warming him slowly by the fire and forcing small sips of broth between his cracked lips. His clothes hung loose on his emaciated frame. When had he last eaten a proper meal? The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness for days. Leah tended him with quiet efficiency, drawing on years of experience with mountain ailments. She brewed teas from her dried herbs and applied poultices to his frost-bitten fingers and toes. On the 4th day, his eyes opened and stayed open. They were brown and kind, despite the pain etched in his weathered face. He told her his name was Jonas Kane. He had been a ranch hand until cattle rustlers hit his employer's herd. The rancher blamed Jonas for the loss and spread word that he was negligent. No one would hire him after that. Jonas had been wandering for months, taking odd jobs when he could find them, going hungry when he could not. The storm had caught him in the open with no shelter for miles. Leah listened without judgment. She had seen enough of life to know that good men sometimes found themselves in bad circumstances through no fault of their own. As Jonas regained his strength, he insisted on helping around the cabin. He chopped firewood, repaired loose boards, and cleared snow from the roof. His gratitude ran deeper than words could express. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow melted to reveal Leah's herb gardens, and Jonas helped prepare the soil for planting. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, two souls who had found unexpected companionship. When Jonas proposed marriage, Leah's first instinct was to refuse. The world below would never accept their union. Jonas knelt beside Leah's herb garden, his proposal hanging in the mountain air between them. She turned away, her hands trembling as she touched the newly sprouted sage plants. The age difference alone would raise eyebrows. 25 years separated them, and she carried the weight of 6 decades while he still had the lean strength of a man in his prime. But deeper concerns gnawed at her heart. The world below had never been kind to women who looked like her, especially those who dared to reach beyond their assigned place. Jonas rose slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. His brown eyes held steady determination despite her silence. He had found more than shelter in these mountains. He had found purpose, peace, and something he had never expected to discover again. Love. Leah shook her head. The townspeople would see only what they wanted to see. An aging woman desperate enough to buy companionship. A drifter willing to take advantage of loneliness. The whispers would follow them everywhere. But Jonas refused to accept her fears as final judgment. Day after day, he pressed his case with quiet persistence. Their conversations by the fireplace stretched longer into the evenings. His arguments grew more compelling with each passing week. Why should the opinions of strangers matter more than their happiness? They had built something real together in this mountain sanctuary. Their partnership worked. They complemented each other's strengths and filled each other's empty spaces. Leah found her resolve weakening. The cabin felt different with Jonah's in it, warmer, more alive. She had forgotten how good it felt to share daily routines with someone who cared about her well-being. When the last of the snow melted from the high passes, Jonas convinced her to make the journey down to Silverbrook. They needed supplies, and he wanted to announce their engagement properly. Leah agreed reluctantly, sensing that this trip would change everything. The town sat in a valley 20 miles from their cabin, connected by a winding trail that tested both horse and rider. Silverbrook served the scattered ranches and mining claims in the region, its main street lined with the usual collection of businesses that kept frontier communities alive. Sheriff Vernon Holt spotted them first. He emerged from his office as they tied their horses to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store. His badge caught the afternoon sunlight, and his weathered face carried the perpetual suspicion of a man who had seen too much trouble. Holt's eyes moved from Jonas to Leah and back again. His expression hardened. He had heard rumors about the mountain woman and her unexpected house guest. Now here they were, bold enough to show their faces in town together. The sheriff approached with measured steps. His questions came sharp and direct. How long had Jonas been staying at the mountain cabin? What were his intentions toward the widow? Did he have employment prospects or was he living off her charity? Jonas answered calmly, but Leah could see the tension building in his shoulders. This was exactly what she had feared. The judgment, the assumptions, the immediate presumption that something improper was happening. Inside the general store, things grew worse. Mabel Thornton held court near the fabric display, her voice carrying clearly as she shared the latest gossip with two ranch wives. The mountain woman had taken in a stray cowboy. How convenient for him to find such comfortable arrangements. How foolish of her to trust a stranger with her home and whatever savings she had managed to accumulate. The conversation stopped when Leah and Jonas entered. Eyes followed their movement through the store. Whispers resumed behind cupped hands. Mabel's sharp gaze missed nothing as she catalogued every detail of their appearance and behavior. Store owner Pete Morrison treated them with cold politeness. He filled their supply list without comment, but his disapproval radiated from every interaction. The prices seemed higher than usual, though Leah said nothing. Small towns had their own ways of expressing displeasure. Other customers made their feelings known through pointed stares and barely concealed smirks. A young ranch hand snickered to his companion about desperate old women and lucky drifters. Two elderly women shook their heads sadly, as if witnessing a tragedy in progress. The worst moment came at the counter when Sheriff Holt entered the store. He positioned himself near the door and announced loudly that folks should be careful about trusting strangers, especially those with no visible means of support. Some men, he declared, made their living by taking advantage of lonely widows. Leah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her dignity. She had faced worse than small-town gossip in her 60 years. Still, the casual cruelty stung. These people saw only what they expected to see. An aging woman past her prime, desperate enough to be fooled by a younger man's false attention. Jonas paid for their supplies with money he had earned doing odd jobs around the cabin. His jaw was set in hard lines, but he kept his temper in check. Fighting would only confirm their suspicions about his character. They loaded their purchases onto the packhorse in tense silence. The entire town seemed to be watching from doorways and windows. Leah could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical force. As they prepared to leave, Mabel Thornton approached with false sweetness. She hoped dear Leah was being careful about her housekeeping arrangements. Mountain living could be so isolated and dangerous. A woman alone needed to be wise about the company she kept. The ride back to the cabin passed in heavy silence. Leah's worst fears had been confirmed. The outside world would never accept their relationship. The gossip would spread to every ranch and mining camp in the territory. Their private happiness had become public scandal. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, the proposal lay between them like an unbridgeable chasm. 3 days after their return from town, Jonas made his decision final. He would not let fear dictate their future. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as he took Leah's weathered hands in his own and asked again. This time, she said yes. They planned a simple ceremony for the following month. Jonas would ride to town to arrange for the circuit preacher's visit. Despite the gossip, they deserved the same recognition as any other couple. Their love had grown from genuine respect and shared hardship, not desperation or calculation. But fate had other plans. Sheriff Holt arrived at their cabin on horseback, his face grim with official business. The morning mist still clung to the mountainsides as he dismounted and approached their door. His hand rested casually near his sidearm, a gesture that made Jonas's blood run cold. The telegram in Holt's pocket had arrived the previous evening from Cheyenne, Wyoming. The territorial marshal's office had sent word about a wanted man named Jonas Kane. Cattle theft, armed robbery, a reward posted for his capture, dead or alive. Holt's questions came rapid fire. When had Jonas arrived at the mountain cabin? Where had he been before that? Could he account for his whereabouts during the winter months? Did he have any documentation proving his identity and employment history? Jonas tried to explain, but his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. He had been a drifter for months after losing his ranch job. No witnesses could vouch for his location during the time in question. His only proof of good character was Leah's testimony, which carried little weight in the sheriff's eyes. The arrest happened quickly. Holt produced iron shackles and ordered Jonas to extend his hands. The metal clanked shut around his wrists with brutal finality. Leah's protests fell on deaf ears as the sheriff explained his duty to uphold territorial law. Jonas looked back at Leah as Holt led him toward the waiting horse. Her face had gone pale with shock and disbelief. This could not be happening. Not now, when they had finally found happiness together. The ride to town passed like a nightmare. Jonas tried to process what was happening while fighting down panic. Someone in Wyoming claimed he was a cattle thief, but he had never stolen anything in his life. The accusation made no sense. Sheriff Holt locked him in the single jail cell behind the office. The iron bars felt cold against Jonas's palms as he gripped them in frustration. Through the small window, he could see townspeople gathering on the street outside. Word was spreading quickly. Mabel Thornton appeared first, her eyes bright with the excitement of confirmed scandal. She had known something was wrong with that arrangement. Decent men did not end up homeless and desperate unless they had done something to deserve it. Other townspeople followed throughout the day. They came to stare at the criminal who had fooled the mountain woman. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction. Justice was being served at last. Inside the cell, Jonas fought despair. His presence had brought ruin to Leah's peaceful life. She would face the town's judgment alone now, branded as the fool who had harbored a wanted man. The gossip would follow her everywhere, making her mountain sanctuary the only place she could find peace. Meanwhile, Leah sat in her empty cabin, struggling to understand what had gone wrong. The Jonas she knew was gentle and honest. He worked hard and treated her with respect. He had never shown signs of violence or criminal behavior, but doubt crept in despite her faith in his character. How well did she really know him? They had shared stories about their pasts, but he could have lied about everything. Maybe the townspeople were right. Maybe loneliness had made her blind to obvious warning signs. The next morning brought no relief. Sheriff Holt rode up to inform her that additional charges might be pending. Harboring a fugitive was a serious offense. If she had known about Jonas's criminal background, she could face jail time herself. Leah listened to the threats with growing anger. She had done nothing wrong except show Christian kindness to a starving man. Now they wanted to punish her for basic human decency. After Holt left, she began going through Jonas's few possessions. He owned almost nothing beyond the clothes on his back and a small bundle of personal items. If he was truly a criminal, where was the evidence of his crimes? Where was the stolen money or valuable goods? Among his belongings, she found fragments of old correspondence, letters from previous employers, a bill of sale for a horse he had owned years ago, documents that told the story of a working man trying to make an honest living. One letter caught her attention. It was dated from the previous winter, around the time the Wyoming crimes supposedly took place. The letter came from a ranch in Colorado, offering Jonah's temporary work hauling supplies. The timeline did not match the accusations. Leah spread the papers across her kitchen table and studied them carefully. Her late husband had taught her to read using newspapers and legal documents. After his death, she had continued learning, finding comfort in books and written words during the long winter evenings. Now those skills might prove useful in ways she had never imagined. Something about the accusation against Jonas felt wrong. The pieces did not fit together properly. She needed to examine that telegram more closely. If Jonas was truly innocent, the proof might be hidden in the details that others had overlooked. But first, she had to convince someone to listen to her theories. In a town that already dismissed her as a foolish old woman, that would be the hardest challenge of all. Leah spread Jonas's correspondence across her kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. The morning light revealed details that others had missed. Her fingers traced the edges of each document, feeling for inconsistencies in paper texture and weight. Her late husband Thomas had been a self-taught scholar, hungry for knowledge despite his circumstances. Every evening after their chores were finished, he would spread newspapers and legal documents across this same table. He had taught her to read using whatever printed material they could acquire. Thomas had possessed an almost supernatural ability to spot forgeries and altered documents. During their 27 years of marriage, neighbors had often brought him suspicious papers to examine. Land deeds that seemed questionable, bills of sale that did not look quite right. Thomas could identify fraud with startling accuracy. After his death, Leah had continued studying his collection of documents and reference materials. The skill had become her connection to his memory, a way of keeping his teachings alive. She never imagined those abilities would prove essential to saving the man she loved. The correspondence in Jonas's possession told a clear story. Employment letters from 3 different ranches, a character reference from a cattle drive foreman, bills of sale for equipment and supplies. The dates and locations created a timeline that contradicted the Wyoming accusations completely. But Leah needed to examine the actual telegram that had triggered Jonas's arrest. Sheriff Holt would never willingly share evidence with her, especially now that she was viewed with suspicion herself. She needed an ally, someone with influence in town who could help her investigate further. The choice was obvious, though it filled her with dread. Mabel Thornton controlled the flow of information in Silverbrook like a master puppeteer. If Leah could convince Mabel to listen, the truth might have a chance to spread as quickly as the original gossip. The ride to town felt longer than usual. Leah had dressed carefully in her best traveling clothes, knowing that appearances mattered in the battle she was about to fight. Her horse picked its way down the mountain trail while she rehearsed her arguments. Mabel lived in a tidy house behind the general store, surrounded by flower gardens that were the envy of every woman in town. Leah found her hanging laundry on the line, humming softly to herself in the afternoon sunshine. The conversation started badly. Mabel's face hardened the moment she saw Leah approaching. She had no interest in hearing excuses for harboring a criminal. The evidence spoke for itself. Jonas Kane was exactly what he appeared to be, a drifter who had taken advantage of a lonely woman's kindness. Leah persisted despite the hostility. She produced Jonas's correspondence and spread it across Mabel's kitchen table. The dates and locations told a different story than the one everyone believed. Would Mabel at least look at the evidence before dismissing it? Curiosity finally overcame prejudice. Mabel had always prided herself on knowing everyone's business in the territory. The idea that she might have missed important details pricked her professional gossip instincts. As Leah explained the timeline discrepancies, Mabel's attitude began to shift. The documents were compelling, but they needed official verification. More importantly, they needed to examine the original telegram that had started this mess. Mabel's relationship with Sheriff Holt was complicated. She provided him with information about suspicious activities in exchange for occasional access to official documents. It was an arrangement that benefited both parties, though neither would admit it publicly. That evening, Mabel visited the sheriff's office under the pretense of bringing him supper. While Holt ate, she asked casual questions about the telegram from Wyoming. Could she see it? The whole town was talking, and she wanted accurate details for her conversations with concerned citizens. Holt produced the telegram without suspicion. Mabel had helped him solve problems in the past by spreading the right information to the right people. Her request seemed reasonable enough. The moment Mabel saw the document, Leah's suspicions were confirmed. The paper stock was wrong for official territorial communications. The typeface looked slightly different from genuine telegraph messages. Most damning of all, the date stamps showed inconsistencies that suggested recent fabrication. Mabel had seen enough authentic telegrams to recognize the subtle differences. This document was a clever forgery, but not clever enough to fool someone who knew what to look for. The next morning, she returned to Leah's cabin with the shocking news. They were dealing with deliberate fraud, not a case of mistaken identity. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to frame Jonas Kane for crimes he did not commit. But who would benefit from such an elaborate deception? And why target a homeless drifter who possessed nothing of value? Leah had been considering those same questions throughout the sleepless night. The answer lay in Jonas's employment history. He had worked for several ranches that had suffered cattle thefts. Instead of being the perpetrator, he might have been a convenient scapegoat. Together, Leah and Mabel began investigating the pattern of crimes across the territory. Each theft had been blamed on different men, usually drifters or temporary workers who could not easily defend themselves. The real thief remained free while innocent men faced prosecution. The forgery itself revealed important clues. Creating convincing fake telegrams required access to official forms and telegraph equipment. The criminal was someone with connections to law enforcement or communications networks. As their investigation deepened, a name emerged from multiple ranch records. Buck Morrison had been present at 3 different locations where cattle thefts occurred. He worked as a livestock buyer, giving him perfect cover for moving stolen animals through legitimate channels. More importantly, Buck Morrison was Pete Morrison's cousin. The general store owner had access to telegraph forms and maintained regular communication with law enforcement across the territory. The family connection explained how the forgeries had been created and distributed. Leah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Buck Morrison had been systematically stealing cattle while framing innocent men for his crimes. Pete Morrison had used his position to create false evidence that protected his cousin and destroyed the lives of convenient scapegoats. Jonas was simply the latest victim in a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for years. But unlike previous targets, he had found someone willing to fight for his innocence. Someone with the skills to expose the truth and the determination to see justice done. Now they needed to present their evidence in a way that would convince Sheriff Holt and the rest of the community. The battle for Jonas's freedom was just beginning. Leah and Mabel spent 3 days gathering evidence before approaching Sheriff Holt. They needed an airtight case that would withstand scrutiny from a lawman who had already made up his mind about Jonas's guilt. Their investigation had revealed a pattern spanning 2 years and 5 territories. Buck Morrison appeared in employment records at every location where major cattle thefts occurred. His cousin Pete had access to telegraph equipment and official forms through his general store business dealings. Most damning was the timeline analysis. Buck Morrison had been present at the Wyoming ranch during the exact period when cattle disappeared. Jonas Kane had been hauling supplies in Colorado, with documented proof of his location and activities. Leah organized the evidence with methodical precision. Employment records formed one stack, witness statements made another. The forged telegram occupied the center of the arrangement, its inconsistencies now glaringly obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Sheriff Holt's initial reaction was predictable skepticism. He had arrested Jonas based on official territorial communications. Now an aging mountain woman and the town gossip wanted him to believe the entire case was fabricated. But Leah's presentation was masterful. She spoke with quiet authority, walking Holt through each piece of evidence step by step. Her analysis was thorough and logical, free from emotional appeals or desperate pleading. The forged telegram told its own story under careful examination. The paper stock came from a different supplier than the Territorial Communications Office used. The typeface showed subtle variations that indicated a different machine. The date stamps had been applied incorrectly, revealing the deception to anyone familiar with authentic documents. Mabel provided crucial context about the Morrison family connections. She had observed Pete Morrison's nervous behavior since Jonas's arrest. The store owner kept asking questions about the investigation's progress and seemed unusually interested in when the prisoner might be transferred to territorial custody. Sheriff Holt found himself facing an uncomfortable truth. He had been manipulated by criminals who understood exactly how to exploit his assumptions and prejudices. The case against Jonas Kane was not just weak, it was completely fabricated. The revelation stung his professional pride, but Holt was honest enough to admit his mistakes when confronted with overwhelming evidence. He unlocked the jail cell that afternoon and formally apologized to Jonas for the wrongful arrest. Word of Jonas's release spread through town within hours. The same people who had gathered to gawk at the captured criminal now watched in confusion as he walked free. Mabel made sure everyone understood the real story behind his vindication. But Leah's investigation had uncovered something far more serious than a simple case of mistaken identity. Buck Morrison's criminal network stretched across multiple territories, involving corrupt telegraph operators and complicit law enforcement officials. The deeper conspiracy emerged as Sheriff Holt contacted his counterparts in neighboring jurisdictions. 3 other innocent men were currently imprisoned based on similar forged evidence. 2 more had been killed while resisting arrest for crimes they did not commit. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Buck Morrison had not worked alone. He commanded a network of cattle thieves, document forgers, and corrupt officials who had been systematically looting ranches while framing convenient scapegoats. Pete Morrison's role was crucial to the entire operation. His general store served as an information hub where he could identify vulnerable targets and create false evidence. His legitimate business provided perfect cover for coordinating criminal activities across vast distances. Sheriff Holt organized a coordinated raid involving lawmen from 4 territories. The operation required careful planning to prevent the criminals from destroying evidence or escaping to Mexico. Timing was critical and secrecy was essential. The arrests began at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Buck Morrison was captured at a ranch outside Cheyenne where he had been preparing to steal another herd. The corrupt telegraph operator in Denver was taken into custody simultaneously, preventing him from warning other network members. Pete Morrison proved more elusive. He had sensed the investigation closing in and attempted to flee Silverbrook during the night. But Mabel had been watching his store, and she alerted Sheriff Holt when she saw unusual activity after midnight. The chase ended at Devil's Canyon, 15 miles south of town. Morrison's horse stumbled on the rocky terrain, throwing him into a ravine where he suffered a broken leg. Sheriff Holt found him conscious but unable to escape, surrounded by incriminating documents he had tried to destroy. The evidence recovered from Pete Morrison's store was damning. Forged telegrams, stolen cattle brands, and detailed records of the criminal network's activities over 2 years. The documents would ensure convictions for the entire conspiracy. News of the arrests vindicated Jonas completely and established Leah as the hero who had exposed the truth. Her methodical investigation had not only saved an innocent man, but dismantled a criminal organization that had terrorized the territory. The community's attitude toward both of them shifted dramatically. People who had whispered cruel gossip now spoke respectfully about the mountain woman's intelligence and determination. Jonas was no longer viewed as a dangerous drifter, but as the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. Mabel Thornton became Leah's most vocal advocate, spreading the true story of her investigative brilliance throughout the territory. The same network that had once carried malicious rumors now celebrated the wisdom and courage of the woman they had initially dismissed. Sheriff Holt publicly praised Leah's contribution to solving the case. Her skills in document analysis had proven more valuable than years of traditional law enforcement methods. He recommended her services to other jurisdictions dealing with similar crimes. The vindication felt sweet, but Leah's greatest satisfaction came from seeing Jonas free and vindicated. Their love story could continue without the shadow of false accusations hanging over their future. The path to their wedding was now clear, supported by a community that had learned not to judge based on appearances or assumptions. The wedding took place on a crisp autumn morning, 3 weeks after Jonas's vindication. The circuit preacher had arrived early to perform the ceremony in the meadow behind Leah's cabin. Golden aspen leaves drifted down like confetti as the couple exchanged simple vows. Mabel Thornton served as witness, her eyes bright with tears of joy instead of malicious gossip. Sheriff Holt attended as well, his presence a symbol of the community's changed attitude toward the couple. Even Pete Morrison's replacement at the general store had sent his congratulations along with a gift of fine china. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Jonas wore his cleanest shirt and a string tie borrowed from the preacher. Leah had chosen a simple blue dress that complemented her silver hair. They spoke their vows with quiet dignity, their words carrying the weight of all they had endured together. After the preacher departed, the newlyweds returned to their mountain sanctuary with a sense of peace they had never expected to achieve. The outside world's acceptance felt like a precious gift, but their love had never depended on external validation. Jonas threw himself into preparing for winter with renewed purpose. He expanded the woodshed, reinforced the cabin's foundations, and helped Leah preserve the final harvest from her herb gardens. The physical labor felt different now, meaningful in ways it had never been during his years of aimless wandering. Leah found herself busier than she had been in years. Word of her document analysis skills had spread throughout the territory, and people began seeking her expertise on various matters. Ranch owners brought suspicious contracts for her examination. Widows asked her to review inheritance documents. Even territorial officials requested her opinion on questionable legal papers. The first visitor arrived 2 weeks after the wedding. Martha Henderson had ridden 20 miles from her homestead with a stack of documents she suspected were fraudulent. Her late husband's business partner was claiming ownership of property that should have belonged to her children. Leah studied the papers carefully, applying the analytical methods Thomas had taught her decades earlier. The forgeries were crude compared to the Morrison conspiracy, easy to spot once she knew what to look for. Martha left with proof of the deception and the knowledge needed to protect her family's inheritance. More visitors followed as autumn progressed into winter. A cattle baron from Wyoming brought a complex land dispute that had baffled lawyers in Cheyenne. A mining company owner suspected his foreman of falsifying ore reports. A banker needed help identifying counterfeit currency that had appeared in several transactions. Each case reinforced Leah's growing reputation as someone who could see through deception to find truth. Her methodical approach and keen eye for detail solved problems that had stumped educated professionals. The mountain cabin became an unlikely center of justice for the surrounding territories. Jonas supported his wife's work with quiet pride. He managed the household duties while she focused on analysis, bringing her tea during long study sessions and organizing her growing collection of reference materials. Their partnership had found its perfect balance. Mabel Thornton visited regularly, bringing news from town and updates on the Morrison conspiracy trials. Buck Morrison had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Pete Morrison received 15 years for his role in the document forgery operation. 3 other network members faced similar sentences. More importantly, the innocent men who had been wrongfully convicted were being released and compensated for their suffering. Jonas's case had opened the door for a comprehensive review of suspicious cattle theft prosecutions across multiple territories. Sheriff Holt stopped by monthly to discuss ongoing investigations and seek Leah's input on complex cases. Their relationship had evolved from mutual suspicion to professional respect. He often said that her analytical skills were better than those of most territorial marshals he had worked with. The cabin itself underwent gradual changes to accommodate Leah's expanding work. Jonas built additional shelves for her reference books and documents. A large table replaced the small kitchen workspace where she had first examined the forged telegram. Oil lamps provided better lighting for detailed analysis work. Winter brought a steady stream of visitors despite the challenging mountain weather. People were willing to brave snow and cold to reach the woman who could unravel the most complex deceptions. Leah's reputation for fairness and accuracy had spread far beyond the local territories. Spring arrived with news that territorial officials wanted to formalize Leah's role as a document examiner. They offered her an official position with the marshal's office, complete with a badge and regular salary. She politely declined, preferring to maintain her independence and mountain home. 6 months after their wedding, the cabin bustled with constant activity. Visitors came from as far as Kansas and New Mexico seeking Leah's expertise. Jonas had built a small guest house to accommodate overnight stays when weather prevented same-day travel. Their love story had become local legend, retold in saloons and ranch houses across the territory. The tale of the mountain woman who saved an innocent man through intelligence and determination inspired others facing similar challenges. On quiet evenings, Leah and Jonas would sit by their fireplace and reflect on the remarkable journey that had brought them together. Their partnership had not only survived external challenges, but had grown stronger through adversity. The herb gardens flourished under their joint care, providing both medicine and income. Jonas had proven surprisingly skilled at cultivation, his gentle touch with plants matching his patient nature with people. Their story continued to unfold with each passing day, built on the foundation of mutual respect, shared purpose, and enduring love that had transformed 2 lonely souls into an unstoppable team. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.